Hey YouTube, how we doing? It's Richard, founder of Short-Term Rental University and Airbnb Superhost. Today's video is the importance of LLC asset protection when you're running a short-term rental business. But first, and this is really important, like asterisk, Charles, footnote, whatever you need, I'm not a lawyer. I don't play one on TV. Don't listen to this guy. Seek your own advice. And in fact, I took a piece of my own medicine and we did exactly that. So just yesterday, I interviewed Clint Coons, who is a lawyer, about the importance of asset protection and how somebody could be on the right side of the law and the wrong side of the law and what the risks are and so on in running a short-term rental business. And as you might imagine, there's an awful lot of liability, and so you want to make sure that you're protected. So big shout out to Clint. Thank you so much. Listen to the podcast. That's public. Everyone can listen to that. And as an added feature, he was kind enough, he spent over an hour speaking to our paid members at Short-Term Rental University, and he answered their very specific questions. So thanks so much, Clint. That was huge value added. Really appreciate it. But let's get to why this is important. First off, hopefully you never find yourself in a situation where you get sued. Hopefully you host and nobody ever gets injured or there's no problems. However, hopefully isn't really a sound business strategy. In fact, I would urge you to put that away and instead be diligent and plan and speak to your own attorney to make sure that you're protected. Because here's the deal. Unfortunately, at least here in America, which is where I live and I know most of the laws, we're in a very litigious society. So if somebody gets injured on your staircase or in front of your building, even if it's their own fault, and Clint gave us some examples about somebody who was in a no-smoking apartment and lit a cigarette in bed and fell asleep and had disabled the smoke alarm so that it wouldn't go off, you know, all the nightmare scenarios, that doesn't mean that you can't be sued. And whether you're found guilty or innocent doesn't really matter. That suit itself, that process, is really gut-wrenching and emotional and takes a lot of time and energy, not to mention legal fees. So what you want to try and do is make sure that as much as possible you're complying with all of the different laws and that you can't be found guilty, but then you want to take one additional step and just make sure that your property, your assets that you've worked so hard for, are protected. And some of the things we talked about are like holding title in an LLC, a limited liability company, and Clint suggested that the actual property be held in an LLC in your state. So wherever that property is, let's say it's in New York or Colorado or Florida, instead of getting one in, say, Delaware or Nevada, which have really good LLC protection, he recommends getting it in the local domicile so that you can file taxes and you're in compliance with those states. Again, I'm not an expert, but these are just some tips that we're passing along. So let me take a step back and just explain what an LLC is as far as I understand it. And it's basically a limited liability company, and whatever assets that LLC owns, it controls and can be sued. And so by way of example, let's just use two different properties. You have property 1 in LLC 1 and property 2 in LLC 2. If something, God forbid, were to happen in LLC 2, it doesn't prevent you from being sued, but LLC 2 would be sued, and if they found you guilty, all of the assets from LLC 2 could be a total loss. That entire home, if that owns a car, if there's cash in the bank account, like whatever LLC 2 owns, could go to pay the lawsuit, okay? But LLC 1 is completely unaffected and completely yours going forward. So it's basically a way to compartmentalize your risk and separate your assets. Nothing is foolproof and you can't do anything silly or break the law, but imagine without the LLC protection, if you got sued because something happened in property 2 and they wanted all of the money and income and the property associated with property 2, plus everything in property 1. That's a total loss. And from my perspective, a 50% loss where there was an incident is so much better than a 100% loss where there wasn't even anything to do with property 1. So now let's try and make this really practical and helpful for you. Should you have an LLC? Well, first off, they're not without costs. You have to file an LLC. There's typically costs involved in that. It can range from, say, a couple of $100s to even $1,000 or more. And then there might be annual filing fees. And then there might be annual tax preparation fees. So this little bit of insurance isn't a no-brainer, and it's not for everyone. That said, it's a really great investment for you as you start to grow your business. So let's cover 3 different scenarios as we did in the podcast. The first is if you have a shared room in your property and that's what your Airbnb business is. Well, if you have one property and you're renting out a room, it's unlikely that an LLC is going to give you much protection because likely you only have that one home and that one room. So it doesn't really do very much for you. It may not be worth your while at this stage in your real estate career, but you may aspire to it. Again, I urge you to speak to your counsel. They may have a different take on it. The second one is now you have a vacation home. So it's a property that you stay in sometimes, and you also Airbnb or short-term rent, when you're not there. Which means that when you're not there, you have another property. Maybe you own a condo in Miami and that's where you live, and then you have a house in the ski area and you rent that out on VRBO. Well, those properties you may want to have LLCs for so that, God forbid, the handyman in Miami, when he's changing the light bulb and he falls, isn't now suing and trying to get your ski house, or vice versa. Your tenant in the ski house slips and falls, it's icy, you didn't, plow the driveway, and he sues you. They can't come and try and attach your place in Miami. So that's an area where I think it makes a little bit more sense. And then finally, if you're a small real estate entrepreneur and you have multiple places, multiple homes, multiple assets, now it's starting to make a lot of sense from my perspective, and that's what I do. I currently own all of my individual properties in individual LLCs, again, trying to compartmentalize the risk. God forbid something happens in property 1, property 5 goes on and lives another day. So to be fair, I'm really just scratching the surface. These are just very basic concepts that I'm trying to share with people and educate people on, because a lot of the members on the podcast and also the paid members that were listening to Clint found it incredibly valuable, and I want to share that with you. But recognize people, have studied this for years. There's case law. There's things that are particular to your state and your situation. So I really encourage you to speak to your counsel, try and figure out a game plan for your own asset protection. But I encourage you to get started because it's really important. It can make the difference between you having a really bad incident but continuing to thrive in your business and or a total wipeout. And we would never want that. So one of the things I want to do is encourage you to speak to the right people. Listen to the podcast. I think it's a great place to start. The link is below. Subscribe to that. And please go ahead and like this video if you found it helpful. Tell us how you do your LLC. And finally, please subscribe to the YouTube channel. I'd really appreciate it. Thanks so very much. Happy hosting, and protect your assets.